second or third wave of feminism and the second wave of what was then gay liberation. And San Francisco was a leading city, I suppose. But from 1976 onwards, the Christian right, initially with Anita Bryant, was trying to wind back progress. And of course the Americans had made virtually no legal progress on lesbian and gay rights, but socially it was, the Christian right reaction was very powerful, and it generated a couple of things. It indirectly generated our first Mardi Gras in 1978 in solidarity with San Francisco. But I guess what happened in 1979 was Sister Vicious Power Hungry Bitch, Sister Missionary Position, Sister Frida Peoples, Sadie Sadie the Rabbi Lady, and Sister K Sarah Sarah, Fabian was unnaturally comfortable with, and a few others. Sister Florence Nightmare formed an order of gay male nuns to combat stigmatic guilt, and this was a bit prescient before HIV. And so in 1981, some people from Australia associated with the Radical Fairies visited.
You might have seen the photo right at the beginning, it'll come back around, but included Sister Missionary Position on the left, and on the right, Gary Schliemann, who was then, I think, Sister Medusa, later became Sister Mancul of the Wild, who were just commenting in San Francisco.
There'd been proto-nuns, Sister Mary Waratah of the Bush, but Sister Medusa, Sister Mary Volupta, which was Fabian Loschiavo's name, and Sister Mary Sit on My Face, a name that the Mother Inferior could never utter, formed the order in Australia in Birch Grove in 1981. And then I was in the first batch of novices with Sister Joy Man's Desiring, Sister Mary Quant, and Sister Mary Tyler Moore. Yes.
So, what inspired you to get involved in the Sisters? You'd already been in radical drag, and you had, I guess, that activist history, but a lot of the other sisters that, I guess, had come through, like if we look at, say, Fabian's history and his novitiate, you had quite a different experience of religion.
Yeah, maybe, I was initially asked to sort of draw the circle about Derek Jarman and Fabian Loschiavo, who had a venerable convent in Malabar, and he died recently, and a number of us were engaged in deconstructing his shrines and archives and chapels. But it reminds me a lot of what was said about Derek Jarman's place. And Fabian had been also a student at this university, so the linkage. I guess I wanted to say a bit about Fabian as one of the strands of the order in Australia, and of course the order in different places has got different traditions. And Fabian had grown up in Marsfield and had a vocation very early on, and was extremely conservative. So he wanted to join the Premonstratensian order. Now, the Premonstratensians, after St. Norbert, who's an incorrupt saint in Prague, also called the Monstrous Pretensions or the Premenstrual Tensions by other Catholic orders. So Fabian went to study as a monk in Green Bay in Wisconsin, but found that Fabian didn't like the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council in the early 60s, and was very traditional. So he broke with the church and came back to Australia, studied archives at this university, got involved in gay activism, but was also involved in aversion therapy, again at this university, where all sorts of people, including lesbians and gay men, were given painful stimulus to realign their sexual orientation, I guess, sexual choices. And then Fabian made an adjustment with Christianity and got involved in a high church Anglican church, St. Luke's at Enmore. and founded Angays, and also got involved in radical gay politics. And later, through his association with his ancestral home in Salina in Italy, got involved in Rifondazione Comunista. So he went from being an extreme right-wing Catholic traditionalist to a revolutionary. And but because of his knowledge of Christianity, and he subsequently became a priest of the Holy Catholic Church of Europe. That's a secret that his church didn't know about. But his extensive knowledge, and I was going to say, sorry I'm raving, there's a number of themes that are quite important in the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. The first is inversion, that is using imagery for this reverse, that is traditional Catholic habits for gay men who are unashamedly promiscuous, including at a time when gay leadership was frowning on promiscuity, particularly as we move towards being respectable married people. So there's an element of inversion, of taking symbols and making them mean the opposite. Subversion in the sense of the Christian Feast of Fools, that is speaking truth to power, and trying to deconstruct or attack power systems of all types. Imperialism, racism, heterosexism, sexism, and so on. And building activism, being using the form of a religious satire to build activism and to build power in the streets, I guess. We used a lot of satire, and that predates the sisters, also with the choir. And it's to turn reactionary arguments on their head and and make them sound as stupid as they are. So can I give a couple of examples? One relating to film, and that is Jean-Luc Godard made a film, Hail Mary, which was blasphemous. And so there was a big crisis at the film festival about it should be banned because it had an unorthodox version of the Blessed Virgin. That campaign wasn't going so well, and so the sisters initiated a campaign saying yes, it was blasphemous, that the Mother of God wasn't a heterosexual petrol pump attendant, and that this shouldn't be portrayed like that, and that we had a petition saying that only the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence could represent community attitudes to censorship, and that all censorship power should be handed over to us. That was going well outside the Sydney Film Festival, until the moment when Gough Whitlam and his wife arrived, and 4,000 people from the Phalange or Kataib or the Lebanese forces arrived with statues of Mary and giant candles and tried to kill everybody during Zikar salutes in the street. And they left so much wax that the street wasn't able to be used for a couple of days after. That was a moment when we thought we were all going to die, but we tried to use reactionary arguments to invert them. Another time was when John Howard wanted to include God in the Constitution, and the sisters led demonstrations and media about rejecting that Australia is consecrated to Our Lady Help of Christians, and that the head of state couldn't be a Protestant whore from another country. That did actually make Christians, made them question the wisdom of putting God into the Constitution. So there's this element of satire, and certainly in the hymns that particularly Fabian wrote, like Ave Mardi Gras. We used rituals, we had professions obviously, exorcisms and blessings of homes, blessings of events, naming ceremonies, relationship ceremonies, because we didn't really believe in marriage, certainly not monogamous marriage, and canonisations. And I think canonisations were really strong from Australia, and that's the linkage with the British sisters and the canonisation of Derek Jarman. But that morphed, as HIV got worse, it morphed into actual pastoral care and mission and education. Sick visits, memorial ceremonies, and safe sex or safe using education, and assisting activism, like the first 3 ACT UP demonstrations you saw a bit before.
In fact, you can see it just up here with a few more sisters than you could perhaps see in the other photos.
Yeah. Now, what I wanted to, sorry I'm raving, but there's an element of appropriation. I know that's an important academic word, since the 70s. What I wanted to say was the sort of Catholicism that Fabian injected into the sisters was not any Catholicism. It wasn't contemporary Catholicism. It was the Catholicism between the 1860s and the First Vatican Council and the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. So it's a reaction within the Catholic Church in Europe to Protestantism, but also to the revolutions in Europe in 1848. And it's a time when the Pope and priests become infallible, when abortion becomes a sin, when Mary becomes immaculate, and so on. So it's a particular type of traditional Christianity, or Catholicism, I should say. And we were appropriating that and traditional habits at a time when they were disappearing. So, when I wore modern habit after the Great Schism of 91...
just interject, only just to say that Sister Third Secret is in the middle of this particular fine photo.
Oh, yeah. So when we adopted modern habit, there was a deep problem because we looked like actual nuns. When we wore traditional habit, people knew that we were gay men. So there's a sort of weird appropriation going on.
Oh, I can ask questions again.
I don't have to.
Well, I guess I wanted to come back to the sainting in a way. Obviously there were many cardinals, bishops, different positions as within rabbis indeed, and that came in quite early with the Sydney House. Can you talk to some of those in the Sydney context?
I think this was more a contribution of the Sydney House more than the Americans. Sainthood and elevating people to positions, of power in the congregation. So people became cardinals or bishops or whatever because of their services to the community. People got sainthoods like St. Julie of the Red Thread for services to sex workers. I know that you all know the book of, Joshua, don't you? Anyway, okay. Or, St. Roberta for services in transgender, others for people in injection drug use.
St. Kendall the Constant?
St. Kendall the Constant for activism and archives work and missionary work with gay prisoners and, peace work, work for peace, I should say. So many people were elevated to sainthood, and if I can just explain, there was a young nun, a young revolutionary socialist nun called Glenn Palmer in Sydney, who migrated to Britain to work in social work. And he took the name Sister Etheldred's a Flashback. And he worked with people that were already manifesting as nuns in Britain and formed a daughter house of the Sydney convents. And that led to this process in the context of Section 28 in Britain, the repression and promotion of homosexuality and, HIV, in deciding to canonise Derek Jarman, which, you can see in the exhibition. But from the point of view of, and that was talked about with us in Sydney and Mother Abyss. Now, from the point of view of Mother Abyss, the question was the film Sebastiani, which was important. Derek Jarman made a film in 1976 in Latin. And so from the point of view of Mother Abyss, the sainthood was because he made a film in Latin. That not many films were made in the 70s in Latin. Mother Abyss was open to ignoring the homoerotic nature of the film and the nudity, which shocked him greatly. And there was a theological problem that we were very interested in relics and particularly relics of incorrupt saints. And we hunted all over Europe for relics of incorrupt saints, you know, like the Holy Foreskin or jawbones of John the Baptist. Now the problem was, in the catacombs in Rome, St. Sebastian seems to have a really large number of femurs, authenticated relics, femurs of St. Sebastian. So apparently in Derek Jarman's film, he's portrayed as having 2 legs, whereas he seems to have been some sort of centipede. That was worrying to the mother abyss here, but she eventually assented to the request from London for the sainthood of Derek Jarman.
Wonderful. But I think it's quite interesting as well, like when you look at, you say the archival record of the London house, you can see that so much of that was drawn from what was happening in Sydney. And that it was, I mean, it had been refounded. The London house had actually been active in the early to mid 80s, but had kind of been defunct for many years. So coming in, they really drew on, and Sister Ethel dreads a flashback, drew on all of that experience as being a sister in Sydney.
There were other similarities with Sydney, like all the gay groups in Sydney, you know, being Sydney, there was like terrible problems with corruption and appropriation of money. So yeah.
Well, that's probably another talk.
Yeah.
I was going to jump back a little bit to talk a little bit about the HIV and the activism, both ACT UP, but also in terms of your experience of going over and finding out about Play Fair and the work that the San Francisco House was doing, then back for things like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence radio mission, sperm, another sperm. We'll have to go into the other sperm later.
Yeah, so it's hard to remember now, but in 1983, people were getting sick, but we didn't understand what was going on. And Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York were epicenters, I suppose. I mean, I think this is because of racism, because I think what was happening is black people were dying before that and were not getting picked up by the health system, but that essentially working age, you know, mainly white gay men, their symptoms were inexplicable. So in 1983, in particular in the United States, people didn't believe in a virus, and it was only transitioning from gay-related immune grid disease, I think, I can't remember, to AIDS. So the knowledge was very, very poor, but on the front line was Sister Florence Nightmare in San Francisco. And their basic approach was that they recognised already there was a health crisis in gay men around Giardia and...
I quite like this one.
Sorry? That's me pre-nun with Sister Miriam Bethlehem. Yes. So it was a period of great doubt. So the sisters produced the first safe sex...
Which is this on the screen.
Promo, which became a model for what we did. Now what's interesting is the conception of AIDS, and certainly not HIV or a virus, is not there. There's a set of problems around like gut infections and a whole range of things and symptoms, but understanding of HIV and AIDS is not there yet. And a lot of the New York stuff is really about guilt, about not kissing, about not having sex, about not rimming, about not doing oral sex. It's just like an expression of guilt. We've been pigs, we deserve it. So the nuns in San Francisco took a different orientation. Their orientation was that guilt was a sexually transmitted disease, and that the war needed to be waged against stigmatic guilt, and that sex itself wasn't a problem, but we needed to work out how to do it safely. And so that's what the miracle is, that we brought back thousands of these play safe pamphlets to Sydney, and it helped in Sydney adopting a much more pragmatic political response to HIV, a bit like San Francisco or Germany and a bit like London, but not like New York. Like New York was like a disaster from the start.
And the brochure formed a very direct model for HIV response, early HIV response in Australia. If you look at probably the first booklet that was done. It was done by the then Victorian AIDS Action Committee, and it's an almost direct reproduction, but accounting for local response.
Yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of that's down to Sister Florence Nightmare and the connection with San Francisco. Yeah.
About time? Wonderful, excellent.
Can I just say one thing? A bit, like part of what this was about was, you know, the connection with this area and the convent in Malabar, and you know, a lot of people in the audience have been involved in transforming what's from Malabar and Fabian's Place into archives with State Library and with Powerhouse and with Nick and Melbourne. And so if you've got any questions about all of that, that's a very, very significant moment in Australian queer history, I think. And that's a parallel with what we've been talking about today. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken and Nick, and thank you, Lisa and Mel. We're going to move on so we can finish up, which the last session is called Queer Remains. There'll be three short presentations, and then